Afternoon, everyone. We're just waiting for all of our participants to file in. So just gonna give it maybe 30 more seconds and then we'll get started. Just asking that everybody mutes their mics so that we make sure we don't have any background noise. Okay, so welcome everyone. My name is Dr. Jani Vremi and I'm the director of the Sridhar Rampal Center for International Trade, Law, Policy and Services. It is my pleasure to welcome you, audience members, and also welcome our co-sponsors, the BCCI, the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry, as well as our esteemed panelists to this wonderful, the first of a series called Food for Thought, where we explore food security and agricultural issues confronting the CARICOM region. Before I hand over to my co-sponsor, let me take the opportunity to welcome, first of all, the president of the BCCI, Mr. Anthony Branker, the panelists, Dr. Lystra Fletcher-Paul, lecturer at the University of the West Indies, Faculty of Food and Agriculture, Mr. Ruel Edwards, Regional Development Specialist for Agri-Food Systems, Mr. James Paul, CEO of the Barbados Agricultural Society, and our moderator, our very own, the young researcher, Ms. Chelsea Brathwaite, who works right here with us at the SRC. So I'm really excited to open this Food for Thought series for two reasons. The first of which is that we are collaborating in this event with the BCCI. It has been a wish and an intention of the SRC to reach out our tentacles to the private sector and work collaboratively with them. And I'm very happy and proud that after years of doing so behind the scenes, we are able today to publicly partner with the BCCI on this webinar series. And also, we will be working together in a very exciting new project in the coming weeks, which we will share with you very shortly. I'm also excited because this webinar is sort of the culmination of one of our SDG SRC policy briefs, this time dedicated to food security. We took a decision at the SRC a couple of months ago to start focusing on some of the issues that come up in the Sustainable Development Goals. Our first SRC policy brief of the series looked at SDG financing, and we had a webinar culminating that effort. And I'm so proud that we have Ms. Chelsea Brathwaite on this effort, looking at one of the really important issues confronting our region that came to light, I think, quite importantly during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's something that these experts would have known about way before, that CARICOM and its food security needed to be addressed. But I think COVID has brought it front and center, and it's something that we feel strongly about as one of the areas that the SRC needs to contribute towards. I'm so proud that Ms. Brathwaite has taken the lead on this effort to look at food security. And so she has been leading the work with the support, obviously, of our predecessor, my predecessor, Mr. Neil Paul, who also took a very keen interest in that work and has led the SRC effort prior to his retirement. So let me now hand over to my co-sponsor and co-host of this event, the president of the BCCI, Mr. Anthony Branker. Thank you so much. Over to you, Mr. Branker.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Yaniv. And with protocols being established, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. As the president of the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry, I am pleased and equally as excited as Dr. Yaniv that the Chamber has partnered with the SRC to host today's webinar on the critical topic of food security in CARICOM, the importance of forging and sustaining collaborative partnerships is a key strategic pillar of the Barbados Chamber of Industry and Commerce. We strongly believe that it is critical for us to work together to develop strong partnerships that will enable us to share ideas and work together to chart a course for the continued growth and development of Barbados and the region. Food security, which is the focus of today's webinar, exists when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. And this is according to the 1996 World Food Summit. The SRC's Food for Thought Policy Brief number 2 also notes that the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations has identified 4 pillars. 1, availability, 2, access, 3, utilization, and 4, stability, that must be simultaneously fulfilled for food security to be achieved. However, a blog by the Inter-American Institute of Cooperation in Agriculture highlights the harsh reality that the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated existing inequalities in food security. Their report estimates that there are now 2.7 million food insecure people in the English-speaking Caribbean. And according to the 3rd round of the CARICOM COVID-19 Food Security and Livelihoods Impact Survey, 71% of respondents are observing higher than usual food prices. The World Bank estimates that between 80 to 90% of all food consumed in the Caribbean originates from outside the region. Presently, it is assumed that only 3 countries, Guyana, Belize, and Haiti, in the region produce more than 50% of their own food. The Caribbean has been heavily reliant on food imports, and presently the region spends over $5 billion of its limited foreign exchange reserves to import food. The cost of these imports have been on the rise, leading to price hikes across the region for many food items. This is due to global factors such as increased energy and shipping costs, the impact from climate change, which has resulted in more droughts and flooding, as well as shortages in key food commodities. The pandemic and other natural disasters have further brought to light vulnerabilities in the regional supply chains, as Caribbean countries grapple with fallen economic fortunes and higher debt burden. Food is a basic human right, and it is essential that as a region we seek to explore all avenues to ensure we are never compromised due to food insecurity, and that we give ourselves the best chance to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal of zero hunger for all. To best tackle the challenge of food security in CARICOM, it is critical that we review and restructure the regional food supply network. Today's discussion is therefore just one of many that are needed to better understand, brainstorm, and challenge the status quo. Over the 195 years of the Chamber's existence, a key mandate has been to help local businesses prosper and grow by facilitating a more enabling business environment in Barbados, as well as the CARICOM region. Food insecurity limits the ability of a country to build a strong and resilient economy, and limits opportunities for business growth and success. A thriving agricultural sector that increases export capacity will help to generate much needed foreign exchange and support economic diversification and growth. It can also potentially reduce our import dependency and conserve our limited foreign exchange reserves by encouraging the development and expansion of local agribusiness ventures, which can drive the creation of quality, innovative food products that lessen the demand for foreign brands. In recognizing this fact, the BCCI has worked keenly and closely with the SRC, and to lend our voice and our resources to help identify and resolve issues that limit agri-trade opportunities. I commend the efforts made by Dr. Yaniv Remy, Director of the SRC, and the BCCI Executive Director, Mrs. Misha Loban-Clark, and their teams to sow the seeds of this partnership, and can assure you that this afternoon's webinar is only the beginning of what we hope will be a fruitful and action-centric partnership, which will make a positive impact on efforts towards food security in CARICOM. We hope that at the end of today's roundtable session, featuring our esteemed panel of subject matter experts, each of you here will better understand food security and its strategic importance, the state of food security across CARICOM, both the challenges and opportunities, the interplay between trade and food security, and the policy and recommendations for advancing the region's food security agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, there is much to be done, and we need to learn more and act now. Rising populations and the changing global climate will require us to mobilize more resources to enhance our agricultural sector, pursue more agri-tech, and transform how we access and distribute food. Looking towards the future, food security must remain high on our agenda, and the Barbados Chamber will remain committed to our partnership with the SRC in this regard. It is our hope to launch in the very near future a joint BCCI SRC Agri-Trade Lab project to support the private sector and connect local farmers and agro-processors with researchers at the SRC, capable of leveraging their expertise to solve a particular agri-trade challenge. It is our goal to improve policies, expand our partnerships, and do what we can to increase the impact of local and regional agribusiness sector to make food more affordable and available. In so doing, we can broaden regional trade, develop a wider social safety net, and support the creation of a brighter economic future for all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you and I look forward to this very crucial and important webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Brinker and Dr. Remy, for your opening remarks. And as Dr. Remy would have mentioned, my name is Chelsea Brathwaite, and I am one of the trade researchers at the SRC, where food security is one of our key research profiles. And recognizing that food security is fundamental to human existence and sustainable development, we at the SRC have launched our food security policy brief series entitled Food for Thought, which aims to explore the trade-related aspects of food security and really how trade can meaningfully contribute to the Sustainable Development Goal number 2, zero hunger across the Caribbean community. So today, to continue this discussion, I am joined by 3 experts who I, for one, am excited to learn from as we dig deeper into this topic. We have Dr. Lystra Fletcher-Paul, who possesses over 30 years of experience working in the agriculture sector, mainly across Latin America and the Caribbean, but also in Southeast Asia and East Africa. In the Caribbean, she has worked with the Agricultural Development Bank, University of the West Indies, the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation in Agriculture in Trinidad and Costa Rica, the Caribbean Agricultural Research and Development Institute in St. Lucia, and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations in Italy, Barbados, Guyana, and Trinidad and Tobago. Her most recent position at FAO was Sub-Regional Coordinator for the Caribbean. On retirement from the FAO in 2018, Dr. Fletcher-Paul returned to the Faculty of Food and Agriculture at the UWI, where she currently serves as lecturer in biometrics. We also have Mr. Sandyford Edwards, who is currently a consultant with the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. He holds over 15 years of experience working in the region with emphasis on structuring investments for the development of regional agriculture, engaging both public officials and private sector leaders. He possesses several qualifications, including a Master's of Arts degree in Development Finance with specialization in finance structuring, agriculture and SME finance, and climate and renewable energy finance for small island developing states from the Frankfurt School of Finance and Management in Frankfurt, Germany. And last but by no means least, we have Mr. James Fall, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Barbados Agricultural Society, one of Barbados's most influential non-governmental organizations, looking after the interests of the farming community. As the CEO of the Barbados Agricultural Society, Mr. Paul is responsible for representing the views of over 500 plus farmers and the overall coordination of AgroFest, the National Agricultural Exhibition. And he believes that food security should be a national priority. Indeed, we are fortunate to be joined by such an experienced panel, and I want to thank each of them for taking the time out to be here with us today. As noted, this session is going to take the format of a roundtable discussion, so to our viewing audience, you can feel free to drop any questions that you have throughout the session. So to get the ball rolling, my first question to our panel is that based on the research that we've done so far, we found that there tends to be a narrow understanding of food security. So automatically, when we think about food security, we think food and we think feeding people, and that's it. But beyond just feeding people, what other aspects would you say the term food security covers?
Who wants to go first? Maybe I should jump in first. As was described in the introduction by Mr. Branker, food security has a number of different dimensions. There's the dimension which deals with the availability of food. That's the food that's available, that you produce locally, that you import. There's also the aspect of it that deals with the access to food. So that deals with physical access, the roads, the markets, the infrastructure that go towards getting food to people, and also the economic access, which deals with the ability to purchase food. So you're talking about poverty, employment, income, and food prices. And then there's the aspect of food utilization, which deals with the actual quality of the food. And it's a major problem that we are facing now because we have these high levels of obesity and overweight caused by the chronic non-communicable diseases because we're not eating healthy food. A lot of the food that we're importing is food that is not good for us. And then there's the aspect of food safety as well, food that has the pesticides and food poisoning, etc. And then there's the last aspect of food security, which deals with the aspect of stability, having food at all times in times of hurricanes, floods, droughts, economic crises, COVID-19. So when we look at food security, it's more than just a production issue. It's nutrition, it's economic development, it's poverty, it's climate change, it's nutrition, it's food safety. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Fletcher. Paul, anyone else want to add to that, or we're happy with that definition?
I think Doc has sufficiently provided us with a good explanation of food security. So no contribution from me in terms of a definition of food security.
Okay. So having established that, and know that we all know more or less what food security is all about, my next question automatically then is, how would you describe the current state of food security in CARICOM? And how has COVID-19 further exacerbated the situation, if at all? And if it hasn't, feel free to share any positives you've seen that have come out from COVID-19.
Maybe I can take that one, open the button as it were on that specific question. As we think of COVID-19 and CARICOM and its impact, I will take the positive and the negative. And first of all, we look at the positive. There have been opportunities where new businesses were born out of COVID, specifically those that utilizes new technology, new apps. You've had companies out of Trinidad, other companies out of the region that would have emerged coming out of COVID-19. You would have had people who would have gone back into production, who were not in production prior. I think another positive would have been the whole elevating of the conversation of food security and food safety at a regional and at a national level, where people are more conscious about what they eat, how they eat, and the whole conversation around food security. Recognizing that the time is short, on the negative end, There are a couple of things that I think we need to be particularly clear about, specifically looking at what has transpired post in terms of COVID. The first thing is that we need to recognize that food consumption has decreased, that the food stocks in households have also decreased, and that we need to also appreciate that we've seen job losses and income reduction, which is still persistent across many of the CARICOM member states, which disproportionately affects the lower income quintile of society. So people who are daily paid, who are in the informal sector, etc., those are more affected than the salaried people in terms of the impact. What that has translated to is, and I think the president of the Barbados Chamber of Industry and Commerce mentioned it, is that we've seen a 57% increase in food insecurity between 2020 and February 2021. Yeah, between April 2020 and February 2021, we've seen 57% increase in food insecurity, where we now have 2.7 million people can be considered to be food insecure, severely insecure, as compared to 1.7. That has had a debilitating effect, a deleterious effect on livelihoods throughout the region. That has affected the region because people are vulnerable and people are feeling the effect of COVID. And I think in a nutshell, from my perspective, that is what has transpired at a regional level in terms of the current state of food security. Foods are available, but can people actually access it continuously, consistently, and are those foods nutritious enough for them to provide their dietary requirements on a continuous basis?
Interesting. You know,
Go ahead, Mr. Paul.
thank you. You know, the interesting thing that food security has two dimensions that we observe when we look at it, which is one, we're talking about quantity of food available for population, and at the same time, whether or not the food that is being provided actually meets the nutritional needs of the population. There are two aspects to it. And whether or not in terms of, in that regard, whether or not there is enough available to satisfy. Right, and you know, one interesting thing that was said just now is in terms of the question of whether or not it is readily available. You know, when we look at COVID and what is happening now, COVID actually is producing so many challenges. And this is in addition to what was happening before, because sometimes we don't appreciate that, say, a weather occurrence in another part of the world has a significant impact on food security in areas such as these. And that is why, in a sense, when we ask, you know, in terms of the stakeholders, the who I think matter most, I think that one of the issues that is coming home to us as we look at what is happening now is the fact that our farmers in the region are going to play a critical role in terms of ensuring at least some level of food security. And if it is one thing I believe COVID has brought home to us, is the importance of looking at our productive infrastructure when it comes to our ability to be able to meet the demands for certain types of food. And the thing is really that, you know, we are going to have to come to the point where that we have to decide the extent to which we are, whether or not we are mobilizing enough resources to be able to shore up that food infrastructure. Because, you know, we're coming to a point, COVID is telling us that we're coming to a point in the world where basically, you know, that food could be an issue. And the thing is really that when you look at the developments that we are seeing right now today, it is that it could happen just suddenly and quickly. The other thing, of course, is the risk, and I noticed that you talk about COVID, but even for instance, when you look at the whole question of the weather patterns that are happening around the world and the occurrences, they are having some significant impact on the availability of food. And that is something too that we are not even taking into consideration. So I want to say it is a very complex matter. There are opportunities in terms of, yes, helping people to be more aware of the fact that there are threats, and these threats are now in some ways coming home to us. And we need also to look at strategies that can help us to at least mitigate against the negative impact of these threats. And I think that we need to come up with these answers pretty early. If not, we are going to face problems as we move ahead.
Can I just add one thing here? And that is not only the availability of the food and the production of the food, but the demand for food. Because what we are seeing, I remember in one Caribbean island, they were on lockdown. And as soon as lockdown was finished, where did they run to? KFC. They didn't run to the supermarket to get healthy, nutritious food. They went to get junk food. So the demand for healthy, nutritious food is something that we really need to work on, especially among our young people, because we're seeing a crisis right now in terms of obesity among young people. We're finding 18-year-olds coming down with diabetes. And you're seeing what COVID is doing with people with these kinds of comorbidities. So the demand for healthy, nutritious food is an important part of that whole food security story as well. And inculcating good, healthy eating habits and making sure that young people and everybody demands fruits, vegetables, fresh fruits and vegetables when you go to the supermarket, rather than going to pick up an apple and orange that has been in storage for how many years. Go and look for your food that is grown locally and grow some of it locally yourself. So the demand for healthy food is important. Thank you.
Without Doc, if I can just come in on that as well. Doc has raised an important point, and I know we're going to get to it. And it just brings me back to the whole idea of consumers and responsible consumption in terms of what we eat and what we provide our children with as well. But the final point I wanted to make on what COVID has done in the region, I think it has also brought us back to the conclusion that it cannot be business as usual. It cannot be the same policy approach that we've taken. It cannot be the same incentives regime that we've used for the last 200 years. And certainly we cannot continue with the sort of technology of the past, that we now need to embrace the modern technology for the entire agriculture value chain in terms of production, processing, distribution, etc. So I do believe that we have quite a lot of lessons learned, or a lot of things that we need to do quickly if we are to come out on the other side post-COVID stronger and healthier.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you could go ahead, because I'm going to ask something about what you mentioned earlier regarding developing taste for local food. So you could go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add, though, that one thing that COVID has also shown us is that we can take control of our own food production. A lot of backyard gardening is going on now. You go to the plant shops and people are going and buying seedlings and so on. Whereas before, you know, they would be relying on somebody else to provide food. People are actually setting up little backyard gardens. So the local production is also taking place as a result of it. Thank you.
So based on what we've been discussing so far, and it kind of links as well to the access point, we had a question in the chat that asked, how can we meaningfully change consumption patterns towards healthier foods, especially when we consider that healthy foods are by no means the most affordable option that we tend to have?
You know, this is an interesting point that you're asking, whether or not healthy foods are affordable. I beg to differ. You know, when you sometimes look and see the consumption patterns, where it is how we consume foods, because somehow, first of all, we've gotten into the habit of the population of thinking that the greater the quantity of the item that we consume, the healthier we are, which is just not true. And again, you know, a lot of it starts in the schools, where if we don't teach our children good, healthy habits in terms of eating, of course it's going to have an impact. When you look at if you look at other populations around the world, depending upon custom or whatever, you can see, look at the French, okay? Where you can see that because of the fact that they have a different way of consuming food or whatever, you can see it being translated in terms of the health of the population. And I'm saying that really, when we look at the way in which we treat the food and how we encourage our young people to treat the food, accounts for the reason why they have the eating habits that they do have. The other point I wish to make when it comes to the whole question of whether or not, you know, the food is affordable or not. I have seen situations, for instance, where we have what I will call completely healthy food available to persons. But you know what? They make a different choice. And you know, constantly I look at something as simple as a sweet potato in Barbados. Extremely nutritious, extremely healthy. And yet you will find that if you take a Barbadian to a restaurant and that is on the menu, they go for some other non-essential and health and in large quantities. It is about how we eat. And I really think that we need to remove from our vocabulary the thinking that basically that the foods that are most nutritious to us are actually unhealthy. The other point I wish to make as far as that is concerned is that, you know, we forget that the market influences food prices, basically. And if we don't get around to recognizing that the greater the quantities of food that we can actually produce, the better. The other point I wish to make, just I don't want to say, because I understand we have a shortened time, is this, that one of the things that we have to be careful of, a lot of us have an infatuation with small holdings in terms of agriculture. However, let us recognize that, you know, one of the things that I keep on saying that we have to be careful of in the region is reducing agricultural holdings below what I would call the sustainable size. In other words, we forget that we live in the tropics. And sometimes, yes, small is good, but sometimes large is also good. And one of the challenges that we have to face in the sector right now too, is that we are not producing enough food in some cases because of the fact that some of the units of land that we are trying to produce the food on is just too small. They are below a sustainable size. But you know, these are some of the considerations that we must make in order to find out what is the correct approach.
Thanks.
And I also add, sorry, that that whole issue of nutrition education that James talked about, it's not only the onus on the school. The onus is also home. It starts in the home. I mean, my mother used to insist that our table, our plate looked pretty, making sure that you had the 4 food groups. I'm not sure how many of the mothers today are conscious of that. You know, it's all about convenience. I mean, there was one of the university lecturers in St. Augustine or in Barbados. She did a survey of why people are not eating healthily. Part of it is convenience. I mean, preparing healthy food takes time and everybody's busy. Part of it is the access. Part of it is the pricing. But also part of it is, it's interesting, one group of people said that they felt that because the mother was imposing all of this, these restrictions in terms of what they can and cannot eat, when they got away from the mother, they felt that they had to break loose and eat unhealthily. So it's the way you train as well, the healthy nutrition, the nutrition education, because it could turn some people off of it. Also in the school feeding programs, creating healthy, nutritious food using local ingredients. I mean, I remember when I was in Guyana, we worked with the Carnegie School of Home Economics to introduce local foods into foods that people normally eat in the school system. And we brought in people who had tuck shops in the schools to show them ways of preparing food that the children normally eat, but substituting with local food. So it's using what you have, using the taste that the people have, but just in introducing local food so that you can get them to get the taste for it as well.
If I can add there, because I believe there are also pull and push factors, and a simple thing as what we would call, you know, state procurement, that takes care of the schools ends of things, but we also have other state institutions. And if individuals are being pushed and are given imported stuff through state institutions, your hospitals, etc., then it means that from the school come all the way up, we are inculcating the eating of foreign foods. So it's really a whole of society approach I think needs to be taken to really work on the changing of consumption patterns, our marketing campaigns, and going back, our local foods properly prepared, properly presented, properly priced. I mean, we have to recognize that we're living in a global space where our young people and individuals generally, not just young people, but citizens are exposed to the media. They've traveled, they've seen what appears to be well-packaged foods, etc., convenient foods. So for example, on a trip I went to the Dominican Republic, and at the breakfast table, it was locally prepared foods that was grown in the Dominican Republic. I've traveled to other Caribbean islands and they give me an English breakfast or they give me an Americanized breakfast. And the breakfast does not reflect that which is grown in the local space. So it really requires the multiple stakeholders to come together to recognize that to achieve food security and to achieve a healthier population works in tandem. That if we have healthy citizens and healthy populations, then your workforce is going to be healthier. Your education system is going to be healthier. Your cost on health services can potentially be reduced. So it's a whole of society approach, I think, that is required for us to be able to change the consumption patterns that we're now being challenged with.
I also think that the private sector has a very important role to play here, because a lot of what we're seeing in the supermarket, our private sector is comfortable with just importing that food and selling it, cheap food and selling it to us, rather than working with our local farmers. And it's something that we have to have a conversation with the private sector. Yes, we understand that you need to make a profit, but especially now where your supply chains are broken because of COVID and so on, all of a sudden now they realize that, hey, our local farmers need to be on board, but they need the support as well. And even with our local farmers, even some of the technologies that are being promoted by our research institutions, we need to look at how that is communicated to them. And what are the systems that are put in place, for example, for upscaling the technologies? What are the incubators that would allow our innovators to say, okay, I have an idea. How can I work with the university or other institutions to make it more accessible, make it more affordable, so that more people could get involved in the production of the food as well? So I think we have to look at it from a number of angles, but the private sector has to play a very important part in this, because they, I think, have been responsible, and you could shoot me for it, for the food security policy that we have in the region, because they import a lot of the cheap food for us that we are eating now.
But, you know,
If we can jump in to represent the private sector at this time.
Thank you very much.
Because
Go ahead,
even though I understand what you're saying, Dr. Fletcher Paul, sorry, I think that we have to go back to the education and create the demand, create a taste, because certainly what drives the private sector, what drives supermarkets is demand. And even if we change and put different products on the supermarkets and there's no demand for it, they will expire and we will have to destroy them. So I think one of the components of what we need to do is to go back to a broad-based educational program that changes the tastes of our populations.
I want to support you there. I do, because, for instance, what we have found is that if we want to create a demand for a commodity, yes, a very good public awareness program, marketing, advertising program actually makes a difference, but it has to be sustained. I remember, for instance, when we did the 100% Bayesian by local program, what we found was an increase in the consumption of local commodities for the period of that. But it has to be continued. And you know, one of the things too, I want to actually mention when it comes to that is that we also need to recognize that I heard Lester refer to the fact that farmers or whoever need to work with universities. I think it's the other way around, because I think that too often, too many of the projects that we do in the region when it comes to, say, research institutions are really based on models that are derived from the developed world, rather than the other way around. You know, even for instance, I look at some of the research activities that we conduct. Too many of it is really based on something that happens somewhere in the United States or Europe, rather than saying, and when we look at tropical agriculture in itself, they are so, and I think that in a sense, we forget when it comes to trade, trade happens because of the fact that a particular region happens to have a surplus of a commodity that it can share with the rest of the world. That's it, especially when it comes to food products. That is the only reason why it happens, because they have a surplus of a commodity that you can say, hey, that's what you worth to share from. The problem that we have in the farming sector, and in terms of why we have such a little attention being paid to the whole question of the quantity of food produced in the region, which actually has an impact on food security, is that too little attention is being paid to the issues that farmers have in the region when it comes to food production. When we, for instance, I keep on hearing supermarkets and retailers say, you know, yes, we want to trade, but the truth is there's not enough. And I'm talking about local trade. There is not enough of the food being produced on a consistent basis. And not only that, not only consistently, but in adequate enough quantities. Why haven't we, after all of these years talking about it, actually tried to deal with it? The reason is because of the fact that the research which is required to help farmers to be able to produce on that consistent basis, to find out whether or not the entities, the economic entities that we are dealing with in the agricultural sector are adequate, whether or not they have all the skills on board, enough has not been paid attention to them. So that is why you are seeing the results that we are seeing. And I really think that in a sense, you know, we need to start to find resources to help. Let us do more on farm research that helps the farmer who has a simple issue of pests. For instance, you know, in Barbados, we have an issue in relation to our citrus crops, citrus greening. And you know the answer that they're giving us to that? We must cut down all the citrus trees and then let them repopulate. But come on, why is it up to now that we have not found the type of the talent and research capabilities at our universities to come and sit down and work with our farmers? That is where our energies need to be. The same thing, for instance, with the papaws, the bunch of top. All of these, in other words, there are unique examples there that frustrate our farmers in terms of providing the necessary fruits and vegetables in order to keep us healthy. But you know what? We are neglecting them. And I really think that in a sense, a lot of the monies that we have in research, they are probably being put in the wrong direction instead of trying to address the basic production issues that we have on our producing entities on the farms.
Chelsea,
sorry, go ahead.
Chelsea, I know you want to move on, but I want to go a little deeper.
And just make it brief.
I'll make it brief.
Go ahead.
James, you have to keep it brief. Yeah, I just want to go a little deeper on the whole private sector ecosystem. I think the farmers is only one cog in the wheel as it relates to the role of private sector in advancing our food security agenda. But we also have to look at the financial institutions because funding is important and what sort of packages that they have. When we look at most of the financial institutions outside of development banks, the credit unions and the commercial banks, they don't have specialized agricultural loan products, very few throughout the region. We have to also look at the whole logistics. How is logistics arranged within islands as compared to importing a container that is easily transported and transferred? We have to also look at post-harvest issues and post-harvest technologies, as well as the input providers, etc. So there are a number of different players within the private sector ecosystem that is important for us to address food security issues, and not just the farmer. I think the producers are just one end, but we have a range of other players that needs to come on board if we are going to achieve this within the private sector ecosystem that then feeds into a broader stakeholders, because we have governments, we have development partners, we have consumers, we have the tertiary and learning institutions. We just have so many different players that forms part of a bigger system that I think we need to bring on board to holistically address the issue of our regional food security challenges.
I also want to add that, James, it's not only about the interface between research and farmers, but among farmers themselves. Farmer clusters and farmers groups. In a number of Caribbean islands, a lot of farmers groups have failed because there's a lack of trust among the farmers themselves. There is need for a support system for our farmers groups. The farmers groups that have done well are the ones which have got not only support in terms of the technology and the access to funding and so on, but also the soft skills. How do you work together? How do you build trust so that you have that long-term sustainability of the group itself? So it's not only about the research, but the farmers themselves have to learn to work better together, especially when you talk about clusters. In some countries, they have worked well. You have had farmers working together and saying, okay, we are going to work together to produce for a particular organization or a particular private sector firm or a particular market. But the farmers themselves have to take some responsibility there and learn to work together.
I don't disagree with you, but I still want to say to you at the same time that even that being the case, I still think we need to look at the fundamental issue that we are facing in the region when it comes to food production. And that is the fact that when you look at the amount of land that we have available within the region, we have to ask ourselves, why is it that so many of it sits down idle? It is not being put into food production. And it has to be, and the answer is really that it is not attractive enough to put it into food production. And there are a number of reasons for that. For instance, the question of investment. I may want to go back a bit to the credit union. I'm a director of one of our major credit unions in Barbados. And one of the things I lament, and that is a fact, that we've seen financial institutions are much more sold on financing the building of houses to alienate more agricultural land, on purchasing cars to come in and of course, and create all kind of, these things all over the place. They're interested in financing these things, but when it comes, for instance, in terms of genuine farming projects, they don't have a clue in many cases, and they're very much unwilling. They view them too risky. These are some of the fundamental issues which we have not addressed in the region, which, by the way, other countries have addressed. And I think really that what we need to do is to learn from what, say, the Americans did in order to help their agriculture to grow, what Europe did. And let us have that kind of engagement with our farmers, with our sector, for it to grow. But we cannot continue to think, but going along the same roads that we have done for the last 20 or 30 years, that we will see results. I think we have to understand that we need to address those production issues that our farmers have that prevents them from at least going further, because certainly we cannot sit down and agree that we feel happy and satisfied that over 50% of the land that we have available, over 50, in fact, much more than that we have available for agriculture right now is sitting down there underutilized. It is not acceptable. And then we still talking about food security.
Chelsea, I know you want to close. But I must say this before you close.
It's very, very brief, very brief. Before I go to the next.
You know what? Maybe I should allow you to ask the question, so I get a little more time to respond. So to ask the next question.
So more or less, you guys answered one of the follow-up questions that I was having in terms of then what stakeholders are needed, because it's a whole ecosystem, as was alluded to by everyone here. It's not just the farmers, it's the private sector, it's the academic institutions, and it's also the citizens. And I think it's very important to zone in on that point, because we need to change our consumption patterns. We are who are going to drive the demand. So that is largely agreed. But having said that, as you know, SRC is a trade center. So I do have to ask this question. Do you all view trade as a friend or a foe to food security? And I know food security is multidimensional. So when we look at it from, utilization, we are importing some high sugar, high fat foods. So what are your thoughts on that? Should there be a better balance between homegrown foods and imported? What do you see as the role for trade in making our countries and regions more food secure?
I will jump in. And I will take it from, and I think this dovetails nicely into the last sort of conversations that we was having. From my vantage point, let's look at two things: the development of the region, specifically its agricultural sector, and the financial sector. The agricultural sector in the region, if we go back to colonial time or pre-colonial time and after colonial time, was developed primarily to export a few selected commodities. And the designs of the institutions, etc., was never about developing your competitive local production to trade amongst yourself. The trade was always to go to the metropolitan cities, our colonial masters, to export commodities and then import back the processed product. So that is one. And then secondly, the financial institutions which developed in the region was developed on the backs of facilitating the export trade. And so you find that the packages and the products and the financial services was designed around that kind of a modality. And it was never designed to support regional development or national development. That brings us into the present reality. And the present reality, if you look at the CARICOM single market and economy, and you look at the number of issues that still pertains to the slow implementation of the CARICOM single market and economy, non-tariff barriers amongst ourselves are more prevalent than non-tariff barriers with third countries. So it is easier to trade with Latin America, Europe, and America than it is to trade within the region. So I would separate trade into two. I would separate intra-regional trade and extra-regional trade. I find that extra-regional trade is more of a friend, that we treat extra-regional trade with a greater level of alacrity, with more ease of transacting. Could be on the basis of the aid for trade philosophy, where if we trade with a particular country, then we are going to get aid, as opposed to trading amongst ourselves intra-regionally. So for example, the region imports over $100 million in poultry products. To me, that suggests that the region itself is a viable market for poultry. The OECS as a bloc imports more poultry than any other member state in the region, the OECS as a bloc. It says to me that trade can be used amongst ourselves with the right policies and approach for our own development. Now, there are going to be things that we're not going to be competitive in producing, that we may not be able to produce. But I believe that there are things that we can identify as a region and develop what is called production corridors to ensure that we can have specialization of production in specific regions and specific parts of the region to ensure that we can feed ourselves. So for example, Belize and Guyana, Suriname, with the larger landmass, might be the best regions to grow wheat, and Haiti to grow wheat and corn for feeding to the animal products. Each country can become self-sufficient in their poultry production. Each country using technology can meet their vegetable needs, etc. So I think trade is a double-edged sword. We still have a substantial amount of barriers that essentially limits the size of our regional markets, rather than looking at it as a one single pie that each of us can benefit from only if we really treat ourselves as brothers and sisters rather than as competition intra-regionally.
I agree with what you said. Excellent point, but not wheat. We could grow something other than wheat. We don't have to.
Corn and soy, and probably cassava, because we can use cassava. Haiti is well versed in cassava. We can use cassava to replace a lot of the other stuff. So yes, wheat has been deleted from the list.
Okay, thank you. The other point I want to make, and it relates to what you said, but also what James said about the support of the government for, with the subsidies, etc. The support of the government. What percentage of our budgets, the national budgets, go toward the agriculture sector in most of our Caribbean countries? In many cases, it's less than 5%. You cannot be serious about agriculture if that is the pittance you're going to put into the sector. So I think the governments have to show their commitment to the sector as well, recognizing that it is an important pillar for the development of the country. It's a source of employment, especially with your tourism. Your tourists are actually your export market locally. You are selling your food right there, and you don't even have to pay for shipment. So linking the tourism with your agriculture sector, linking the agriculture with health, those are contributions that the agriculture sector makes, rural development. So I think this sector deserves a lot more than 5% of your national budget. So the government commitment is also a very important part of that.
Just to follow up on that, that is very true. Because for instance, when you look at what we're spending on agriculture on annual basis in the budget and expecting so much, it's a national disgrace.
Exactly.
But it has to do with prioritization. I think that what we in the Caribbean needs to recognize is that, look, the train has long gone when it comes to the whole issue of tourism. And for instance, there is much more to be earned out of agriculture in terms of the opportunities that it offers as we proceed. And one of the other issues that I wanted to make is this. Somehow we somehow like to look at the agriculture to break it up, or what do use the word? I think President Nkrumah talked about the whole question of the balkanization of Africa. But what we see too much in the region is the balkanization of agriculture. And somehow when we discuss agriculture, we want to put the farmers up here, we want to put the processors up here, we want to put the feed mills some other place and all kind of stuff. We do not see the agricultural sector as an entity comprising different players that have to be brought into the discussion in order for anything meaningful to happen. And even in that regard, it also emphasizes the reason why we need to have a discussion with our lending institutions to ensure that they're on board in terms of supporting the sector. When you look at the tourism sector, that is the approach that has been taken. And maybe one of the greatest failures that we've had and has influenced food security in the region is the fact that the players that are needed to really develop the agricultural sector, we have not brought them all together in one room to see the roles that they need to play and how do we assist them in terms of playing the roles that they need to play. I do agree with you, Lister, when you talk about the fact that it is not only, for instance, helping the farmers in terms of research. It is not only that, but also it is how do we get Massy, for instance, okay, to play a more effective role as a marketing agency instead of relying on a government agency that cannot do a very good job with it. Anyhow, all due respect to them, all due to the bureaucrats, they can't do a good job. And sometimes what we also end up doing is that instead of trying to bring agriculture in the region into the commercial space that it needs to have, in other words, give it some legitimacy as a viable commercial activity, what we do, we apply this type of what I would call treating it as some third cousin that cannot be thought of as a normal commercial activity. We need to commercialize it. And governments, in a sense, need to provide that kind of resource, as the United States did for the internet, to develop that. We need to recognize that the role is to enable the agricultural sector, okay, to be able to develop the ability to sustain itself, but provide the resources for it. And I think that will help a long way. If not, if we keep on talking about these small farmers and doing it, will remain small at the same time. And we're killing ourselves in that way.
Yeah, and James, and I think that there are some good winds, some tailwinds in the region that is blowing now. And if I can build from what Dr. Paul, Fletcher Paul would have alluded to, and even yourself, that at the moment, we know that the whole idea of food and food security has been placed again as a major item on the head's agenda throughout the region. But more so, the private sector, and I'm speaking of the collective private sector, has been invited and now have a seat at the table. They have identified, meaning the private sector, some priority areas, priority products that they believe forms the first raft of investments that they would like to put their resources behind to sort of begin to turn the wheel and to move the regional food system forward. And for those to become the catalysts to facilitate other investments. So for example, poultry and poultry products has been listed. Coconuts has been listed. Cassava has been listed. Some small ruminants has been listed. Those are just about 4 that have been placed on that list of products that the private sector is agitating for and articulating for to move regional food security forward. But at the same time, it's going to require the policymakers to come to the table and to respond in quick time. It cannot be that the policymakers are going to respond in 2025 because the private sector, they would find ways to spend the money. Because at the end of the day, it's all about receiving a return on investment. But there is one other thing, though, that bothers me.
Just make it short.
I'm going to make it very short. There's one other thing that bothers me as it relates to the priority and how we treat agriculture. And it has to do, James, with the producers. How many of our producers are part of what I call the national insurance programs, where they make a contribution towards an insurance scheme that allows them to benefit just in case they can't be on the farm, just in case they get sick, for future pension. Those are things that I think we also need to think about holistically if we're thinking of food security, because part of it is livelihoods. People are unable to buy food because they don't have livelihoods. And if we have mechanisms to improve their livelihoods in case of emergencies and issues, then I think it's going to contribute a long way to improving the chances of being able to afford, access, and utilize food consistently and sustainably every day.
And recognizing that we've been getting so much good feedback. If the panelists could allow us 10 more minutes, if that's fine with you all, we will continue for 10 minutes and then wrap up. One question that we did have is, based on everything that has been said, it's agreed that things need to change. And we've long known this, right? We know we need to reduce the food import bill. We know exactly what we need to do. We have cabinet papers on top of cabinet papers. I remember in a previous conversation I had with Mr. Paul, he said we have different research. Every time there seems to be a new administration, you know, we start over the process. So the question then is, what can we actually do to change what needs to be done instead of talking about it? You know, how do we move now from policy and writing strategies to actually implementing? Because as we know, we all from the Caribbean, we suffer significantly from an implementation deficit. So I don't know if y'all had any thoughts or suggestions to share on that.
You know what? Find a catalyst. Find a catalyst, because one of the things that we seem to forget. Look, we could talk all we want to talk. At the end of the day, it's when the rubber hit the road. Okay? It is that, do we have something to show? And that is the constant thing. When we talk so much about the whole question about food production, but which country in the region sets any targets for food production? Name one, not one of them. So in other words, we have nothing to hold ourselves accountable for. And you know what? The answer is that not one, and so consequently, year by year, we fail to reach any target because there's sometimes none. And you know what? Our bureaucrats get away with it. So we spend $45 million a year on the Ministry of Agriculture, and they have nothing. Tell them to show us something for it. They can't show us not one thing for it. And that is the issue. We have a university in the West Indies, all due respects. Okay? Tell them, look, we want you to show us actual projects that you're working on in relation to agriculture. And it must be shown. In other words, the time for when you just producing these papers that sound nice and well and they're going abroad of it, those days are done. You know, one thing I want to talk about, cassava. You mentioned cassava. We sat down in the region over 10 years ago and talked about, how we would like to integrate cassava into feed production. And you know what? In that discussion, we did not even seek to involve any feed company in the region to say to them, how can we help you utilize cassava in feed production? Now, instead of the approach that we took, let's do this little small thing here. We involve bureaucrats who have never run a company, never sold feed, in any case, never need to tell them to put down the ingredients so that to make sure that those ingredients themselves can be utilized as a commercial feed. That you don't know what to produce a commercial feed. All I'm saying is that we need to be relevant right now. Okay, anything that we do, it must have some relevance to the industry, and that is and we talk about customers, because as we know, if we change the eating habits of our consumers, they will buy the food. If, for instance, we have a different approach in development that says to the people who matter, the business people, our feed producers, our farmers, that look, what we are producing, you can actually take and utilize in your plants to make them more efficient, they will actually, it will come off. But the problem is that too many of the things that we are coming up with for the agricultural sector are things that cannot apply. It does not meet the needs. We do not meet the agricultural sector where they're at.
Thanks.
There was an experience coming out of the 2007-2008 financial crisis where the Caribbean came together and developed what was called the Caribbean Growth Forum, where each of those countries had to publicly account for the rate of implementation of policy reforms to encourage growth and to preserve employment. That methodology might be required for the food sector, that where these countries are asked to publicly account as to how you are performing on some food security index. And it's there. You know, we have food security policy and action plans that was developed some years ago, and as Dr. Paul would have alluded to, some has not even been approved by respective cabinets and governments. Some has been approved but never been implemented. Some have never been monitored. So I believe that we need to call for that public accountability session from our leaders to say, we want every year for you to account to us, the citizenry of the region, the public of the region, to say what you have done on these index that we all agreed to prior, that you are going to be marshalling the troops and the resources for us to achieve. I think unless we have that public conversation and public accountability, then our implementation rate might continue to be abysmal.
And Dr. Paul, for you.
Yeah, I also think that we need to focus on results. Too often we focus on the problem and we don't focus on results. What are the targets? What are the milestones that we're hitting for? And setting up, I remember when I was in FAO, they set up these multidisciplinary food security committees in these countries, in some of the countries, and they were able to set targets. And each month they met and they said, okay, what are you doing? Who is doing what? You know, and also having a champion to pull it along, because in a lot of cases in the Caribbean, unless you have somebody, as James says, the catalyst, somebody to pull it along at first until it gathers the strength and momentum it needs, I think that is what we need to be looking at. So accountability is important. Making sure that we have a results framework in place. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. As Roel rightly said, we have the National Food and Nutrition Security Policies and Action Plans. We need to look at them and say, who is supposed to be responsible for what at the national level and the regional level, and get with the program. Make sure you get the resources that are required by the governments, by the private sector, by the university. Just at the launch of the 100th anniversary of the university, the Faculty of Food and Agriculture, the 100th anniversary celebrations, one of the points that was made is the importance of relevance of research. You know, each student who comes into the faculty should have a project which is related to some food security problem in the region. We should not be dealing with some esoteric thing in the university, because if we don't do the research ourselves, who is going to do it for us? You think the people in the States are going to do it for us? No way. So we have to put systems in place, and even within the university, your systems of rewarding your staff with your promotion and so on has to be linked with the relevance of the research that they're doing. It's not just a matter of publishing in a particular type of journal. It has to be, what has this contributing to move the needle in food security for the region? So don't come to the university, or even any postgraduate student and so on. If you're talking about some project, it must be related to a specific food and nutrition security policy, problem in the region. And also, this whole stigma that is associated with agriculture starts from very young. You know, I have colleagues who, when they graduated from the Faculty of Agriculture, said to me, if any child tell me he come in and doing a degree in agriculture, I tell him, go and run in the hills. I ain't going to support that. So if you yourself as a graduate do not have a conviction for the faculty and for agriculture as a whole, so we have to change this whole mindset about agriculture. And I keep saying, let's change it to food systems, because it's more than just production. And we have to make sure that we teach our children to grow food from very early. That's why Guyana and Belize and so on are self-sufficient, you know, because everybody has a garden, and agriculture is compulsory in schools up to secondary school level. So this is what we have to do from then. We have to make sure that agriculture is part of our psyche, and we don't see it as slavery anymore. It's part of our food security, our very life and health. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Dr. Paul. And against that backdrop, I am pleased to announce that in the light of relevant research, the SRC, in conjunction with the Bcci, we're looking to launch our own agri-trade lab, which is targeting local farmers and agro-processors who will be interested in pursuing export opportunities, or who are already, exporting but are facing some type of challenge. So we're looking to become more demand driven in our research. And I hope that this discussion, it doesn't just fall on deaf ears, but that we actually take up the mantle and make that change. And now, as we reach the end of today's lunchtime chat, which for me was definitely a very thought-provoking session. I mean, if you came to this session hungry, without a doubt, you're leaving filled with a lot of food for thought. I, for one, am very very, very grateful for the insights that our panelists had to share. Thank you all for taking the time. My hope then is that all of the knowledge we would have acquired here today, all the thoughts we would have shared, that we would all go and try to make a change and play our part and make our nations more food secure. As we learned today, it's not just the Ministry of Agriculture. It's not just the responsibility of the farmers. It's responsibilities of you and I to change our consumptions, to drive demand, to start our own backyard gardening. So let's really all play our part. And I want to say a special thank you to the BCCI, their whole team, Mrs. Valerie Hope, Shanice, the president, Mrs. Michelle Lobankar, all of them for collaborating with the SRC on this endeavor. A special thank you also to Mr. Samuel Eugene, our tech support, and to you, our viewing audience, for making this session as interactive and as engaging as it was. My name is Chelsea Brathwaite, and it was a pleasure of mine to be your moderator today. I really do hope that you all enjoy the rest of your day and continue to stay safe, and look out for our next lunchtime chat. And feel free to visit the SRC website, which is at www.sridharrampalcenter.com, to view new additions to our Food for Thought Policy Brief series. And you can also check us out on social media at our handles SRCUE on Instagram and UE. And I would now turn over to our director at the center, Dr. Jani Vremi.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. I wasn't slated to come in and say anything. I think Chelsea has represented the SRC very well. I just wanted, because there's so much passion on this topic, it has been one of the most impassioned that I've seen so far, and people feel very strongly about it. The panelists, you've done a wonderful job, so much so that it made some of the Q&A redundant. We didn't get to the questions, unfortunately. And I saw a couple of suggestions in the chat that we hold a second one of these food for thought webinars, which we will take on board and consider with our partners, the BCCI. I just wanted to also say that as Chelsea and the president of the BCCI had mentioned, we really want to get more involved in the practical solutions to the problems. We do research, but our research has a very practical orientation. It's something we feel at the SRC very strongly about. Peer-reviewed journals are important, but we want to take the research to the private sector, to the stakeholders, to the vulnerable groups. And so part of that effort will be a launch of an agri-lab. Yes, I saw the suggestion that it should be regional. We want to pilot it locally, get a specific problem of a regional or international area related to trade that a BCCI exporter or a regional importer is facing, and our researchers led by Chelsea will look and see how can we come up with some solutions to that specific problem, pilot that and expand, because we have trade lab already that we do. We've done some things with the CCJ, with the licensing authority, cannabis, etc. So we're taking that concept to agriculture and food security, as Dr. Paul said, food systems, and seeing how we can utilize a problem and come up with a concrete solution. So we encourage you to look out for our Food for Thought series, look out for the work we're doing with the BCCI, and thank our panelists for leading what I thought was one of the best discussions I've heard so far on food security related issues in CARICOM. So thank you all again. Stay tuned. And on our behalf, of SRC, thank you all for tuning in again. Mr. Branker, I cannot leave without inviting you also to say a few words from the BCCI perspective, if you would like. And if not, yes, so on behalf of myself and the rest of the panel, yes, Ms. Hope, on behalf of the BCCI also says it has been a rich and excellent discussion. So thank you all. Thanks to my moderator, Chelsea, and thank you to the panelists and the wonderful audience. It's goodbye.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.